where the remaining Luftwaffe planes really ended up after 1945. It's a question historians still debate, and one surrounded by rumors, missing records, and secrets buried deep inside Allied intelligence archives. May 1945. Germany has fallen. The skies over Europe, once dominated by the roar of Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, have fallen silent. Across hundreds of airfields, from Bavaria to the Baltic coast, Luftwaffe planes sit abandoned. Intact fighters, shattered prototypes, unfinished jet aircraft, and machines so advanced the Allies could hardly believe they existed. Some were captured. Some were transported in secrecy. Some simply vanished. What happened next would shape the early Cold War, jet technology, and the air forces of three superpowers. And yet, little of this story was ever told to the public. Today, we will uncover the real fate of the Luftwaffe's surviving aircraft after World War II. From Operation Lusty and Soviet test squads, to British intelligence units, French rebuild programs, scrapyard destruction, and the handful of planes that dodged extinction to become priceless museum relics. This is a story of secrecy, engineering brilliance, and the aftermath of a war that changed aviation forever. What happened to the Luftwaffe planes after 1945 was no accident. It was part of a race, fought not in the skies, but in the shadows, to control the future of flight. To understand the fate of the remaining Luftwaffe aircraft, we must go back to the final chaotic months of the war, January to May 1945, when the Third Reich was collapsing from every direction. The Luftwaffe in ruins. By early 1945, the Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former strength. Fuel shortages had grounded most training units. Experienced pilots were nearly gone, and Germany was losing aircraft faster than it could replace them. But what the Luftwaffe did have was extraordinary. Me-262 jet fighters, the world's first operational jets. Arado AR-234 jet bombers, capable of outrunning. Allied fighters, Do-335 File, the fastest piston-engine aircraft of the war, Heinkel prototypes, including Delta Wings and early jet night fighters, rocket interceptors like the Me-163 Comet, and dozens of unfinished experimental. The Allies knew these designs were years ahead of anything flying in the West. A race to capture technology as Allied armies advanced. American from the West, Soviet from the East, British from the North, entire teams were formed with one mission: capture German aircraft, technology, engineers, and research before the other Allies got them. The American mission was called Operation Lusty, short for Luftwaffe Secret Technology. It was led by Colonel Harold E. Watson and the now famous Watson's Whizzers, elite pilots trained to fly captured Luftwaffe jets right off German airfields. The British had their own intelligence teams, including air disarmament wings and the secretive ferry pilots pool. Their job was to secure airfields, catalog aircraft, prepare them for shipment back to England. The Soviets, advancing faster than any other power, captured some of the most advanced aircraft still intact, including several Me-262s, Arado bombers, and rare prototypes that never made it west. The problem? What to do with thousands of planes? By May 1945, the Allies were stunned by what they found. Across Europe, they discovered 7,000 plus mostly intact aircraft spread across former Luftwaffe bases. Over 2,000 prototypes and pre-production aircraft in hangars and underground factories. Crates of unfinished rockets, engines, and advanced weapons. Nearly 1 million pages of research documents. Most of these machines were valuable. Some were dangerous. Others were too advanced to destroy but too unstable to fly. And the decisions made in the next year would determine the fate of every surviving Luftwaffe plane. Germany divided, so were the planes. When the Allies split Germany into occupation zones, the aircraft were divided as we. American zone, Bavaria, Hesse, Württemberg. British zone, Northern Germany, including Schleswig-Holstein. French zone, Southwestern Germany. Soviet zone, Eastern Germany and major industrial regions. What each power found and what they chose to do with it was radically different. 1. The Americans, save everything valuable. The U.S. wanted three things: jet engines, radar and electronics, cutting-edge prototypes. Anything flyable was taken. Anything unneeded was destroyed. The Me-262 became a priority. Watson's Whizzers flew more than 30 captured jets to Cherbourg, where they were loaded onto the carrier USS Reaper and shipped to America for testing. 2. The Soviets: capture, copy, and learn. In the Soviet zone, special NKVD-directed aviation teams seized everything they could find, often before frontline troops had even secured the area. They captured jet engines, rare prototypes, Messerschmitt research archives, entire engineering teams. Many of Dr. Hans von Ohain's assistants were taken east. So were multiple Arado jet bombers. The Soviets cared less about flying the planes and more about replicating the technology. 3. The British test what they could, scrap the rest. The British had fewer resources than the US. They selected a handful of top aircraft.
Do 335.
Mi-262.
Ardivi simti 34.
A few FW-190 variants. Everything else was cut up for metal, often within days of capture. 4. The French rebuilt the Luftwaffe for their own use. In an unexpected twist, the French Air Force actually repaired captured Bf-109s and FW-190s to use as frontline fighters after the war. By 1946, France briefly operated one of the largest fleets of former Luftwaffe fighters in the world. A chaotic inventory. By mid-1945, nobody, not even the Allies, knew exactly how many aircraft still existed. Some were hidden in forests. Some were buried in collapsed hangars. Some were destroyed by retreating German crews. Others were taken secretly by Allied intelligence before anyone could catalog them. And some simply vanished. This is the backdrop. This is the chaos into which the remaining Luftwaffe aircraft disappeared. As the marching continued, more American units appeared: jeep convoys, support platoons, medical detachments, and communications companies assigned to the 34th Infantry Division. Their boots struck the wet pavement in perfect cadence, creating a deep rolling echo through the narrow government streets. Churchill watched them with remarkable intensity. He wasn't just observing a parade. He was measuring an army. Looking at their posture, the condition of their equipment, the confidence in their eyes, he took in every detail. General Ismay noticed. He was appraising them, as one might appraise the turning of a tide. Because that's what this moment represented. The tide of the war is beginning, ever so slightly, to turn. London reacts to the foreign giants. To British eyes, the Americans seemed enormous. Taller, broader-shouldered, and better fed than the average British soldier, they looked almost unreal in their clean M1941 field jackets and bright new helmets. A young boy standing on a milk crate shouted, "Are they real Yanks?" A shopkeeper beside him laughed. "They must be. Look at the size of them." Even the policemen in their traditional helmets couldn't hide grins as the Americans passed. A woman waved and called out, "Give Jerry hell. We've kept the island warm for you." The cheering intensified as each battalion passed. More people poured into the streets, swelling the crowd until Whitehall felt like the center of the Allied world. Behind Churchill's steady gaze was a storm of thoughts. He knew the brutal arithmetic. Britain had lost nearly 30,000 soldiers in North Africa alone. Aircraft production was strained. The Royal Navy was losing ships in the Atlantic. Food and fuel reserves were dangerously thin. Britain needed America, not just as a partner, as a lifeline, and now, at last, he could see that lifeline marching in front of him. His face softened, his jaw unclenched. For the first time in months, he allowed himself a quiet breath of relief. Americans feeling out of place. The Yanks' perspective. Many American soldiers later described this day as surreal. They were told London was gray, quiet, beaten down by years of bombing. Instead, they found themselves greeted like heroes arriving on stage. Private First Class Arthur E. McGowan wrote in his diary, "We expected ruins and silence. But London welcomed us like family." Still, beneath the excitement, nervousness lingered. The Americans were new to war. Yes, they had survived basic training. Yes, they had shipped across a dangerous U-boat-infested Atlantic. But they had not yet fired a shot in Europe. Many wondered, do the Brits think we're up to the task? Churchill wondered the same, until one moment changed everything. The commanding presence of General Ryder. Marching at the front of one column was Major General Russell P. Red Bull Ryder, commander of the 34th Infantry Division. Even among thousands of soldiers, Ryder stood out. Rigid posture, unshakable expression, eyes fixed forward, radiating calm authority. Churchill's eyes locked onto him, and for a brief moment, the two men acknowledged one another with the slightest nod. A warrior's respect. Later, one of Churchill's aides would say, "The Prime Minister saw in Ryder the kind of commander he had prayed America would send." The atmosphere shifts. As more units passed, the tone of the parade shifted from novelty to seriousness. These were not war tourists. Behind the excitement, there was real determination, real steel, in their marching. One British veteran, missing 2 fingers from Dunkirk, whispered, "They look ready." His friend replied, "They'd better be. God knows we've held the line long enough." The drizzle turns to rain. Halfway through the parade, the drizzle became a steady rain. Cold, wind-driven, and typically British. But the Americans kept marching. If anything, they marched harder. Rainwater streaked down their helmets. Mud spattered their leggings. Wet rifles glinted in the weak daylight. And Churchill noticed. Not a single man broke formation. He tapped his cane against the wooden platform. Then he muttered to his aide, "Good. Let them march in the rain. It will make men of them." 1500 hours. Part 3 begins, the crisis. A sudden disruption. Just as another battalion approached the reviewing stand, a loud metallic clang echoed across Whitehall. A lorry had stalled and skidded on the wet street, narrowly avoiding several soldiers in the American column as it passed. For a moment, confusion rippled through the formation. Officers shouted commands. Rain hammered the cobblestones. Spectators gasped. The British police tried to help, but only added to the chaos. And Churchill leaned forward sharply, eyes narrowing. This was exactly what he feared. Was the American army still too green? Would this moment, this parade, expose the United States experience before the world? The Americans recover flawlessly. Then something remarkable happened. The young American lieutenant leading the formation barked a single command. "Column halt."
Instant silence.
Then, right, oblique, forward, march. In one fluid movement, the entire battalion shifted angle, stepped around the stalled vehicle, and realigned perfectly, without hesitation, without panic, without breaking cadence. The crowd erupted in applause. Churchill's eyes widened. His aide wrote later, "The Prime Minister was visibly impressed. It was the moment he realized the Americans were not amateurs." Churchill's remark that shocked his staff. As the battalion straightened and resumed the march, Churchill's expression changed completely. His shoulders relaxed. He lifted his chin. Then, in a quiet, contemplative voice, speaking not as a politician but as a man who had carried his nation through 3 years of hell, he said, "These men will finish the job." His staff froze. General Ismay later wrote, "It was the closest I ever heard him come to admitting Britain could not win this war alone." Churchill's meaning was unmistakable. The Americans were not merely arriving. They arrived as the decisive force in the war. Aftermath of the moment. The British crowd understands the importance. The rain softened. The cheering grew louder. Flowers were tossed from balconies. But beneath the celebration, a quiet understanding spread through the crowd. History had just shifted. The United States was here, not as a symbol, not as distant allies, but as flesh and blood soldiers, tens of thousands more on the way. Churchill's private emotional moment. When the final units passed, Churchill stepped back from the railing. He did something he rarely did in public. He wiped moisture from his eyes. Was it the rain? Perhaps. But one aide who stood beside him wrote, "There was a tremble in his hand." The Prime Minister was deeply moved, more than I had ever seen him, because for the first time since 1940, Churchill believed that victory, real victory, was possible. Not soon, not easily, but possible. and that belief would carry him through the darkest year of the war still to come.